a stench so vile it made courtiers collapse. Boils rotted on his flesh, and after death, his coffin leaked black fluids, lapped up by stray dogs. This wasn't just a king's end. It was a descent into horror. Today, we uncover the grotesque, untold death of Henry VIII, the once golden monarch who died not with majesty, but in decay. He once stood as the image of glory, tall, golden-haired, and majestic. Henry VIII, born on June 28, 1491, wasn't just a prince. He was a spectacle. At 17, as he rose to the throne of England, foreign ambassadors described him as angelic, with a presence more divine than royal. A Venetian observer even wrote, "He surpasses all other Christian princes in beauty." But what happened to that radiant boy king? How did Europe's most handsome ruler die bloated, broken, and rotting, so foul that courtiers gagged in his presence? It all began with a single moment. In January of 1536, during a jousting tournament in Greenwich, the 44-year-old king thundered into the arena on horseback. But in a violent crash, his horse toppled, landing squarely on top of him. Henry lay unconscious for 2 hours. He survived, but he was never the same. The injury to his right leg refused to heal. What started as a wound became a weeping ulcer, constantly oozing and infected. The stench, overwhelming, so powerful it announced his arrival long before he entered a room. Courtiers, terrified of his wrath, were forced to smile through the nausea, unable to flinch or speak of the odor. And that wasn't all the accident stole. Something changed in Henry's mind. Some historians believe that blow to the head sparked something darker, a tilt into paranoia, rage, and cruelty. The very same year, Henry accused his second wife, Anne Boleyn, of treason and adultery. The charges, likely fabricated. The outcome, execution. Meanwhile, the king's mobility declined. He could no longer ride, joust, or walk freely. His once athletic frame ballooned. His youthful 89 centimeters, waist swelled to over 130 centimeters. His weight, over 180 kilograms, so immense that servants had to hoist him with pulleys between rooms. Door frames were widened just so he could pass through. And the rot only spread. His body was collapsing, but his appetite only grew. Royal kitchen records reveal a man consuming over 5,000 calories a day. His diet? A brutal parade of red meats, meat pies, and endless goblets of wine and beer. Vegetables were rare. The sheer volume of food, paired with his forced inactivity, accelerated his decay. But it was his legs that told the true horror story. The ulcers deepened. Physicians of the time, without real knowledge of infection, applied so-called treatments that only made things worse. Small blue diamond hot irons to cauterize the wounds. Small blue diamond poisons like arsenic and mercury to cleanse. Small blue diamond bloodletting, which weakened him further. Soon, bone peeked through blackening flesh. The stench, it could be detected 3 rooms away. Despite this ghastly state, Henry still craved companionship, or perhaps the illusion of youth. At 49 years old, he married Catherine Howard, a girl of just 19. He called it a return to joy. But behind palace walls, it was something else entirely, a grotesque farce. Catherine, unable to bear the king's deformities and rotting limbs, sought comfort in the arms of a young courtier. When the affair was exposed, Henry flew into a fury. He ordered both of them executed. His final marriage, to Catherine Parr in 1543, was not of passion, but practicality. She became his caretaker more than his queen, tending to the king as his body crumbled beneath him. By now, disease ruled the man who once ruled empires. Modern doctors believe he suffered from diabetes, severe gout, heart failure, possibly even syphilis, though debated. The result? A monarch caught in a spiral of agony. His life became a cycle of screaming fits, uncontrollable rage, and long hours of silent despair. At times, he would sit motionless, lost in a haze of pain, as his court watched from a distance, fearful but silent. As his body rotted, so did his mind. The brilliant strategist who once charmed Europe now saw enemies in every shadow. Henry VIII, once a master of statecraft, became consumed by paranoia, convinced of conspiracies and betrayal within his own court. He turned on friends, advisors, even family. All it took was a suspicious glance, a stray word, or a whispered rumor. Heads rolled. One of the last was Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, a decorated nobleman. The charge? Treason without true evidence. The timing? Just 9 days before the king himself would die. By now, fear gripped the palace. Every servant, every noble, every bishop knew one thing. Say the wrong thing, and it might be your last. But Henry feared something else even more poison. His meals were now surrounded by ritual. Small blue diamond every dish was tasted by servants before reaching him. Small blue diamond every utensil was inspected. Small blue diamond every cup watched like a hawk. Whether these precautions were the result of mental decline, or minor strokes clouding his judgment, no one dared ask. By the final winter of 1546 to 1547, Henry's condition was beyond rescue. Gangrene had devoured his legs, blackening the ulcers and oozing through bandages. The smell unbearable. Courtiers masked their faces with perfumed cloths, struggling to breathe in his presence. But worse than the scent was the silence. No one dared speak the truth, that the king was dying. Under English law, to predict a monarch's death was treason. So the farce continued. Physicians lied. Courtiers smiled. Even as his body swelled, as his skin darkened, and as his breath came in rasping gasps, everyone pretended hope remained. In reality, Henry had become a living corpse. By January 1547, death stood at the edge of Henry's bed. Fever gripped him, likely caused by septicemia, a deadly infection coursing through his body. His breathing grew shallow, labored. His skin was blotched and swollen, a grim canvas of what remained. At night, he murmured names, whispers from the past. Jane Seymour, the only wife who had given him a male heir, and Bullen, whose ghost some believed haunted him. Yet still, no one dared say it, even as the smell of rot and death wafted from his body. Even as his mind unraveled into delirium, no one dared utter the words, "The king is dying," because to do so was treason. At last, on January 27th, with no hope left, the charade ended. Henry allowed Archbishop Thomas Cranmer to be summoned. Too weak to speak, the once mighty king made one final gesture. He squeezed Cranmer's hand to signal that he died in the Christian faith. Just hours later, in the early morning of January 28th, at the age of 55, the most powerful monarch in England took his final breath. But the horror didn't end there. His body, grotesquely swollen and fragile, needed a custom coffin, oversized to contain his decaying mass. The embalmers, using crude methods of the time, stuffed him with aromatic herbs, removing organs in hopes of masking the inevitable stench. It failed. The coffin was not sealed properly, and so, as it lay in Sion Abbey, awaiting burial, it leaked. Cadaveric fluids seeped onto the stone floor, and that's when the most macabre image of Henry's story was born. Stray dogs, drawn by the stench, licked the blackened fluid dripping from the coffin. The king who had defied the Pope, dismantled the church, and reshaped England, now lay helpless, his putrefied remains consumed by scavengers. It took nearly 3 weeks to prepare for the funeral. On February 16th, 1547, the ceremony finally took place, a grand event, heavy with royal tradition. Trumpets echoed, nobles bowed, and prayers were read aloud. But beneath the robes and rituals, a sickening truth lingered. The coffin still reeked of death. Behind the pomp, courtiers winced behind perfumed handkerchiefs, desperately trying to mask the unbearable odor leaking from within. And yet, they carried on, because this was the King of England, even if the man inside was no longer recognizable. Henry was laid to rest at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, beside Jane Seymour, the only wife to give him a male heir, Edward VI. But fate had one more irony in store. Edward, the fragile son Henry had changed history to produce, the reason he had broken from Rome, executed wives, and reshaped an entire religion, would reign for just 6 years before dying of illness at 15. The crown passed to Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who attempted to undo her father's Protestant legacy. And finally, it passed to Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, the very woman Henry had killed under false charges. She would usher in England's golden age. And so, the true legacy of Henry VIII did not lie with the son he so desperately wanted, but with the daughters he had overlooked, even destroyed. His grotesque death was more than a medical horror. It was a symbolic collapse. The man who once ruled with absolute power, who thought himself above God's laws, was reduced to rot and ruin, his body violated by stray animals, his image shattered by time. Henry VIII's death didn't just mark the end of a man. It marked the collapse of a myth. For decades, he had ruled with iron will, rewriting laws, executing queens, and tearing England away from the Pope's grasp. He believed himself divinely chosen, untouchable, and everlasting. But in the end, he was betrayed by the one thing he couldn't conquer, his own body. As English historian Alison Weir once wrote, it is one of history's great paradoxes. The man who began with such promise, beauty, and brilliance ended as a grotesque caricature of himself. He died tormented, paranoid, and deeply alone, surrounded by silence, flattery, and fear, but not love. The radiant Renaissance prince had become a monstrous, decaying tyrant, and yet his shadow remains. His political legacy, the Anglican Church, the monarch's supremacy over Rome, the reshaping of England's identity, still echoes in the modern world. But so does the lesson of his death. Henry VIII's final days are not just a tale of disease and decay. They are a stark reminder of the limits of power, the fragility of glory, and the equalizing force of mortality. He lived like a god, but he died like any man, helpless, decomposing, and forgotten by the very body that once held a crown. Behind the grand portraits and royal myths lies a brutal truth. Even the mightiest rulers cannot rewrite